Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. We just made it in time. Had some technical issues, and we figured out the last second, so whew, we made it.
Good morning, Mike. How are you?
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. How's it going?
Happy Tuesday, gentlemen.
It is Tuesday. There it is. We're waiting for it.
It's a happy one, and it's a happy one.
It's been a man. This year is going fast. I can't believe we're already into June.
Middle of the way through it.
Middle of the way through the
Make
middle of
gray.
June. Yes.
It's going quick. Any kind of interesting things come across the interwebs this week or last week? We should catch up on things.
Part of me wants to talk about data marts every episode until they come up with a release.
I think we need a full episode on just data marts in general.
Every week.
Every week. Welcome to the Data Marts podcast. Well, the big thing, Mike, you mentioned it too, the SQL BI, Marco Russo, the contoso data generator.
Yeah, so contoso, I guess it's like a SQL BI. Woo, got to sneeze. The SQL BI contoso data generator is a very interesting project that was just kicked out here recently. So I guess a kind of a run-up of this one is, if you think about large data sets or having data sets where you need to test your measures or calculations across, often you need like a dummy data set that has relevant information or enough information to produce actual, like, something that can burden the DAX generator or the DAX code. So
Stress test it.
Stress test a little bit, yeah. So if you have a formula, for example, the standard contoso database, I don't know how many records it has, maybe 1 million in it, I don't know. But 1 million records, as the technology has gotten so much better, has caused the need for data sets to have many more records. And so he has written I guess it's like a C# script that allows you to script out and automate data generation for the contoso database. And so now you can have, I'll grab the link. I didn't copy it yet, but I'll grab the link here and copy it and stick it in the chat window here for everyone. If you are into that, this is definitely for very technical users who are interested in that. Have you guys had a chance, Tom? Did you have a chance to check it out or just read the article?
Yeah, no, it's definitely the technical side. There is an executable, but again, I'm not very smart, so I couldn't get it working. It's really just a few BAK files, the PowerShell script. So I'm hoping for some more documentation on each of the different files in there. But yeah, I mean, for those who've always wanted to play with the sample data set, and I get that question all the time, this is a perfect one. So
sample data set at scale, right?
At scale, yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, I think
it's always interesting to me. Like, not interesting. It's good to see they're constantly innovating in ways in which they can provide really useful things for sure.
I mean,
Marco and Alberto.
I remember. I mean, I was conversing with someone, I don't know, who was talking about data the other day, and we were talking about, like a couple million rows used to be big data. The tools you had at your disposal would like freak out if you had a couple million rows, and when data was that large, and you're like, that's all I can handle. Like, that's all the VI tool or whatever could run off of, and then the only thing that could handle like multiple hundreds of millions was like these massive IT supported projects. Well, now you're looking at, we can get Power BI Desktop to run 50 million rows easy, like no problem. So the technology has changed, and now the tools you need to test things have also changed. So now you need bigger and bigger data sets. And so I think this is a great solution for, a very practical problem. Anyways, I thought it was a really, really cool example that's sent out there.
Go check it out.
Yeah,
I will definitely be
links in the
letting
chat.
people know, because I always get that, like, hey, what sample data set do you use? And this is, like I said, a perfect example of one that's also universally used. It's been around quite a while now.
Yeah,
So
and it's one of these ones where if you want people to like have a common place, a lot of people use the Contoso database or the Contoso example as just a very general, how do you say it, tutorial, right?
yeah,
Because that way when you run these different data queries or DAX queries or whatever you're running through, everyone has the same data set. So a lot of times people will say, just go get the Contoso database. It's out there somewhere. Start from there, and then you can build on top of that. And it kind of just helps you stitch everything together there. Anyways, that was really cool. Any other kind of announcements? Other things that are going on across the interwebs?
I was reminded of you this last week,
Oh,
Mike,
oh boy.
because periodically you find these sayings that you find absolutely hilarious, and no matter how
Uh-oh.
much feedback, whether positive or negative, anybody gives you,
I just
it
stick
doesn't
with it.
matter.
I
Like
just
you're
stick
just
with it.
gonna go with it.
Yep.
It it kind of feels like Matthew Roach did that this last week with. Did you see his blog called Data Flows with Benefits? so like the whole thing starts with the product team hates it when I use this description, but this is my personal blog, right? So like he found a way to, I think, articulate really well like some of the enhancements that Data Flows provides on top of data marts on top of Data Flows.
Mm-hmm.
But then like 3/4 of the way through it, he's like, yeah, and there's all this other stuff that differentiates it, but we're not going to talk about that. So like he made his analogy of like data flows with benefits work for a blog without like a full comparison. But he does make some really good, interesting points, I think, to what we were talking about last week, where there's a lot of question around, okay, well, we already have data flows. How is data marts different? And he outlines some of those very specific enhancements that you can get with data marts,
Mm-hmm.
and a pretty large endorsement, from the fact that it sounds like he's just going to go that route, as opposed to using data flows anymore. So I thought it was an interesting article after we had discussed those aspects of not being real clear on it,
Mm-hmm.
and definitely worth a read. So if you haven't seen it, it's also a funny article too.
He does a great. I'll grab that one. Oh, you already grabbed it, Tommy. Thank
Yep.
you. He's a great writer. He does a really good job, and it's he doesn't really like you know mamby pamby around and like it's just all like he's usually just all
I
in
don't
like
think hey, like maybe
unfiltered
today's topic
lens.
is really good because I can't see you putting Matthew Roach in a box.
You don't put baby in a box.
Right.
So yeah, totally agree with that one. A good article actually. I'm reading through some of this the
I
article
think I
here.
already added it to our backlog of topics.
I'm feeling every week, every couple days now. We've been talking about data marts over and over again, and I think it's getting to the point now where I think we need a full episode just discussing.
Just let it bake a little bit.
Let them
get some more fuel for the fodder.
I guess
they're taking a lot of feedback. I've seen a lot of chatter on different channels. Like there was a LinkedIn post yesterday from someone who was, the top 2 features that have to be put into data marts, and Arun was responding, right? Pulling in the product team.
I saw that
to engage. Yeah, it's awesome to see.
I think I saw that one as well. It was something around like, well, again, we're now marrying the worlds between like a data flow, a SQL server, and an analysis server, kind of all in one single environment. And I think that's where, to me, that's where some of these changes are getting interesting because those traditionally have been like 3 separate tools, and now all of a sudden it's kind of looking like the same tool, which is kind of interesting.
ProLogica, I think it's Theo Lechev. He put out an article saying like the good, the bad, and the ugly about data marts, and it's everything we've talked about. Like it's really cool. You can do this.
You must be listening to the podcast.
Yeah, yeah. Or we're just we know what the people want. So
that's for sure not true.
Yeah. But it goes, right?
We think we know what the people
yeah.
Maybe that's better.
It
Exactly.
is interesting. Our biggest, in a sense, complaints or barriers to entry were very similar to Theo when it came to how can we not do anything else with it? Like, should we be using Azure Data Factory? Like, why is there no, in a sense, ability to use this to store data, not necessarily just use it as it is right now. So that was one of the huge things. But yeah, I think let's let it bake, use it some more, and then we'll do a full episode before we give a full episode devoted to it.
Yeah, I still think there, like there's a clear delineation between the audience, right? Like who is it aimed at?
Yes.
And I think
that's the big
if
difference for me.
my last point is, right, like it's either I haven't keyed in or Microsoft needs to do a little bit better job of pushing out who their persona is for the feature,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
Right, because I think our conversations automatically assume a persona,
Go to the
and it's
IT
not
group.
really relevant right away,
Yeah.
or we don't know how a particular feature crosses the different boundaries, or if it's supposed to.
Yeah.
And maybe that's where some of a lot of our conversation comes in.
We'll just wait for the next article from Matthew Roach.
Yeah.
He'll tell us where it
It
fits.
changes the context though, right? Because if
It does.
this is supposed to be more business analyst focused, then all of my driving of questions is going to be related to, okay, great, how do I graduate it?
Mhm.
Right? How do like it finally gets to a point? How do I productionalize it or enterprise it? Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
If it's supposed to be for everybody, well, then you're just missing these features.
It is an interesting concept, though, when it comes to if this is their grow up story or part of their enterprise solution. Yet we keep talking about the audience is very much geared to someone who's no code, low code, like the business user. It's kind of like, are they
Sure.
going
Yeah.
more self service, or where's that in a sense?
It's always, yeah.
Obviously. So it's a little interesting thing. And then you have the Power BI data set. So where does that governance come in? So we will see where that goes. That's for sure.
I agree with that one. All right. Well, you guys want to move on to the topic of the day?
Speaking of governance.
Speaking of governance, this is an appropriate.
People.
Yeah. One last
What do
quick
we-
thing. There is a conference in Chicago coming up.
Oh yeah, we should definitely talk about that.
Yeah. So it's the Data Insights Summit, not the one you're thinking of.
But good like it though.
But
like,
yeah, but good like it. Yeah, no, still good, just not the same.
I guess we should give a brief historical
Yeah.
recall on this one because not everyone's going to understand what you're talking about, Tommy. Because not everyone went to the original. So back in the day when Power BI first came out, I guess this was like what 2016 was the first year it came out, first year it happened. So back in 2016, Microsoft did the Data Insights Summit, which was a summit geared around basically Excel and Power BI. It was basically solely based on those two things. It was a very small conference. I think like only 1,000 people went, and it was just really around getting people more familiar and starting off with Power BI stuff. And Seth and I went. I think at the time we were kind of friends because we were just starting our user group in Milwaukee. So like we knew of each other, but we didn't like travel together. We weren't like hanging out the whole time. It was like I knew you as a face, and I just kind of went kind of on my own.
Yeah.
And
you spoke at that one, right? You did the top tips and tricks?
No, not the first year.
Or the first year.
First year I attended.
Yeah. Okay.
Second year I did it. So they did it for like 2 years. They did the Data Insights Summit for 2 years.
Best conference ever.
It was really good. It was like the data analyst conference. It was like all these things you could learn, and I think it was very exciting because there was a lot of everything in Power BI was so new. We weren't used to seeing anything there. DAX, tabular models, all this stuff. They were building everything from scratch, and so every time you turn around the corner, there was like 1 million new features showing up. So it was always very exciting to see where they were going and where the roadmap was going to be taken for the product. So then it kind of got swallowed by Dynamics. So at some point, Power BI became popular enough, and then they kind of started that conference started moving more towards a Dynamics conference that was like the Power Platform. So like it's Dynamics, Power Apps, Power Automate, which is all good. I'm not saying any one of those things in their own right are not a good thing, but this was just initially very hyper-focused conference around data things, and I just loved it. Anyways, this conference, moving forward now, this is not run by Microsoft. This is run by Reza out of New Zealand, who is doing a conference in the U.S. He's doing a concert. Yeah. Get your tickets now.
Live concert.
Who knew?
So
has new skills.
Yes, exactly. So visit the datainsightsummit.us. And so this is like a similar vein of conference as the original. Very heavily focused on technical items, a lot of pre-cons around technical things. And it's going to be based out of here to Chicago. So Yeah, Johnny, I agree with you. I want to see a data concert as well. Yeah, we'll be all jazzed up about that one. All three of us will be there and rocking our heads off. So
I'm just excited it's live in person.
yeah, power ballads. I love it.
Power ballads.
From the Power Platform. I agree. So, anyways, check out the link that we put in the chat window there in case you want to get involved or go to that conference. I think it'll be highly valuable to you, and you'll learn a lot of really good things. There's a lot of great speakers that are going to be going there, so I highly would recommend it, especially if you want to grow your skills a little bit. This is going to be one of the first. I think this is going to be the first main Power BI conference happening in the Midwest since COVID hit. I haven't heard of anything else at this point. So unless you want to travel really far away, it potentially could be a really good one of the first conferences back in the U.S.
It's a pretty aggressive endeavor given current states and picking Chicago. hopefully it stays right on track.
That's why we're pushing it, because it's gonna be fun. I'll be there.
And I'll be buying pizza. So
Tommy's gonna go buy some pizza. Awesome. All right, cool. Topic for today. Let's talk about the concept of pushback. Tommy, frame us some ideas here. What were you talking about? The importance of pushback. What do you mean by that?
So we definitely don't want to step on toes, but unfortunately, this is one of those conversations that again comes up from after hours offline conversations where if you work in Power BI, if you develop reports, work with data for a living, you're familiar with an influx of requests from a lot of different people. One thing that you realize very quickly is not all of them really provide value to the business. For me, I can tell you my own grow up story with this, where you just get a request like, oh, this is super important. You spend hours, you spend good amount of time, stress, Googling, trying to figure it out. You create it, and honestly, it was not connected to any team, any objective. That person just wanted to see a data point and they were done.
Yep.
Those types of requests come in more often than we think. And we have to remember, and I had to really realize at that point, like my time is in a sense valuable. I only have so many hours in the day to work on all these requests.
Yep.
And if I'm working, even if I'm learning all these new skills or scenarios, if I, at the end of the year, am asked, what did you do? And like, oh, these 5 reports took up 30% of my time that no one saw.
Yep.
How valuable am I being? So that's kind of where we kind of start in terms of, okay, you get a lot of requests, but we can't do everything just because someone's asking for it. Thus lies in pushing back.
I think so. 100%. Let's talk about influx of large volumes of work requests, but I think it falls under a larger umbrella of when someone is asking us to do more than is reasonable, right? And that falls into kind of what you're talking about, which is you're an individual contributor, right? Like you have a load of report requests or different things that you have to do or being tasked to do within a certain deadline. But there's also higher level, bigger initiatives that go through managers, for teams, or decisions that have to be made, or you being put in a position where often the knee-jerk reaction is like, hell no, right? Like, so I think this will be a fun conversation because there's not a person who hasn't been put in this position. And I think collectively, as we've kind of talked about, doing this episode, there's been, I think, definitely a lot of tips and paths that we've all dealt with to try to manage your way through these situations. And it's always a good conversation to make sure that you can represent yourself in any level in the right way without just flat out saying no or looking like a blocker to the business for some reason or another.
So I think I feel like there's 2 areas of which I'm interested in here in this, or in 2 areas that I'm feeling are communicated items here. One is pushing back on like the report build, right? I've been doing a lot more of, yes, you can do all these amazing things, but do you want to do all these amazing things, right? Do we need a million bookmarks? Do we need all these fancy features? Is this going to an external client or not? And I think the reason I'm doing some pushback there is because the more complicated you make it, the harder it is to manage and maintain it moving forward. So I think there's like a modeling, and like another area of pushback that I think is very focused around report building is, how good is your data model? I see that you have all these snowflaking tables. Do we really need them? Can we re-engineer the data? Do we have control of the back end? Can we reshape it so that it's easier for me to consume in the report? So I think for me, there's like pushback areas in those two areas. So then I think also what you're talking about here, and I think Tommy, where you're focusing on and Seth are, you guys are focusing on like, okay, the requests are coming in. There's too much reports coming into the requesting team, and I don't feel like I can. Tommy, to your point earlier, right? There's so much requests. There's so many requests coming into me that I just can't. I can't say yes to everything. And
Right.
every request that comes in, you know, what is the level of audience for that request? Does this, the last thing we want to do is build a whole bunch of reports, spend a bunch of time on things, and then, 75% of them are never used again. Not what we're looking to do, right? Or, what kind of request you're looking for? Are you looking for a request where you just need access to the data, or do you really need a report that tells you something, right? What are we talking about? And I feel like a lot of the requests I'm seeing right now are, we want to use Power BI to just get access to the data. And I don't think that's really the right approach. I think building like a paginated report is really the right approach for a lot of these requests coming in to build their own stuff. And so here's where I think the conversation for me would go is, how do you build something, whether it's a model or report, where you can offload it and let other people discover and explore and build their own things on it? Because I've had the realization as you have, Tommy, I'm only one person. I can only do so much in a day. So if I don't train or teach or invest time into helping other people become more data literate, I'm doing myself and the companies I work for a disservice, because I don't want you to rely on me all the time. You guys have to get self-sufficient in this to some degree.
It's interesting. I don't know why I didn't even think of the other part of pushback. I was really had the mindset of just a request coming in, whether we do that request at all. Not necessarily we have this report or this project and there's components of it that how much marginal difference will that make for the user in terms of value to make decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So there really are those two parts of that are really good to also consider. And I really do like the idea of, okay, that self-service side. I'm still a little lenient just giving that to anyone. I think there's a better process for us in terms of streamlining different requests where we have our gold data sets. I am more, and maybe this is data march too, but the more and more I'm looking at things, the more I am dead set on really revamping how our reports are being built and creating these base data sets in Power BI desktop for each of the departments that have all the measures.
Mm-hmm.
And now with composite models, really, I think it just got GA or super close to GA. Being able to build on that just makes sense rather than having to recreate the wheel, so to speak. I'm really looking at this personally more from really the origin of request. Someone's like, we want to be able to see, members at risk of, expiring, etc. Right? Okay.
But here's where I go with
Yeah.
again, this is where I'm like, okay, of what we've identified as organizational importance, right? What are the things that we are prioritizing? And I think as your company becomes more comfortable with Power BI, you're doing less work to build them the reports, and you're doing more work to expose the data models to them, right? I would think you'd have like a couple or a handful of reports where, here's the reports. Okay, you're asking these things. I think at some point you want to start mixing some of that with, okay, here's what your request is. You already have access to a data set that does this. Let's walk through how to do that together, kind of thing, and start teaching your people, like, here's the data model, here's how this data model works. Getting them familiar with dimensions and facts, and having the right measures in the model that are going to support time-based calculations or things that they need. I think there's a threshold where you want them to start using your model as a self-service report building thing, because then what you're doing now is you're offloading some of that workload to another team. You don't need to be the single controller of all that information.
Are
I think
you
it
the
depends.
single
Okay,
controller of all the information though?
What do you mean?
say that again.
Who are you asking?
I'm
Tommy
saying,
or
are Tommy,
yeah?
like, are you the single, like, the challenge? There's 2 points in there, right? But
Mhm.
like, if you are the only way into that data set, then that creates a little bit of a problem or a secondary part of the conversation, Mike, which
Yes.
is a harder one to deal with when high pressure get a bunch of reports coming in,
Mhm.
have to go out, is long term. The solution could be something that would slow down the delivery of all of those reports, right? And you do this in every aspect of,
Mhm.
like, in general, we do this,
Yeah.
is what I mean, in reporting, where you have to make the choices of, yes, I'm going to do this thing for longevity,
Yes.
and I'm going to slow down the immediate need a little bit knowingly, because if we don't have this in the future, it's
Yep.
going to set us up for failure,
100%
right?
agree.
Which is always a hard thing. A lot of times it's like, this could be bucketed into tech debt, right? Like,
Yeah.
what are the things you
Mhm.
accept that you're going to push out for speed versus, and you can clean up, versus something that fundamentally is going to cause problems for your report or something downstream if you don't do it,
But this is
just
also
for expediency.
yeah, I agree. I think those decisions are not easy to make, right? That's not a light decision to be able to say, okay, what are we working on, and where do we put the effort to get the maximum value of whatever my team or our report building team is
Right.
doing, right? How does that work? Do you build a mega model that has a whole bunch of thin reports off of it? Like what? And a lot of this stuff you don't learn until you get into it, right? So usually you start off building this like monolithic model, and you're like, oh my gosh, this thing's too big. We need to start cutting this thing apart. Or I've added some stuff in here that's only relative to these handful of reports. Maybe there's a clean to break point with reporting. So we build this model that's too large, and then we start cutting it apart, and then you re-engineer it so it's more report specific or groups of reports specific. I think there's a planning that can go along with that. But we really are
I
talking
think
like it's the data engineering part of this, and I think is the hardest.
so. I think this is cyclical, right? In my experience, it's always been cyclical.
Mm-hmm.
You have periodic times where a mountain of work comes in, right? And where this pushback conversation usually comes in when we don't have enough time to produce all the things within the deadline. I think one of the first points I'd make is, regardless of what level, if we're talking just reports coming in, right? You need a clear view of all of those requests. You
Yes.
need to take a step back out of constant delivery and executing as fast as you can, which you find yourself in these modes, right?
Yep.
And take a step back to look at holistically how much work is there, and whether or not there are areas that you can streamline or do faster than others, or like evaluate how you would go about delivering what is being requested of you. If you don't do that, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage, because you're just going to be trying to
Mhm.
crawl through a mountain of work without understanding how high the mountain is, or which paths are going to be easier, up that mountain. And I
Yeah.
think taking those pauses, especially when people are asking more or you have all this volume of work to do, to understand what that current set of work looks like, um, is imperative, so that you can find solutions, because you're gonna 100%, you're always going to find a different way to approach the problem, or approach a body of work, if you do that, versus just trying to, like, put your head down and run forward as fast as you can.
I like what Dan says in the comments. He's talking about um, this is not. There's a portion of this that's managing short-term workloads, but really, what we're talking about here is there's two-part discussion to this. There's like the workloads and the things that need to get done on the day to day. Then there's this data culture direction. You're influencing the data culture of the organization by what you're doing. There's a broader, higher level conversation that's happening here around when you're talking about pushback, right? What does the data culture do inside your organization, and how are they functioning? Is it a healthy culture? Are we to me, I feel like the importance of what we do is to bring the level of data culture to like bring more data to them, bring more analytical thinking to that team, so that we're continually investing in uh, a broader audience understanding what our data culture is and being able to aptly use it, stand alongside them, help them, train them, in addition to producing these larger data assets.
And I think we need to take a quick step back or a small step back when we're talking about pushback and looking at the things that we're going to work on, things we're not going to work on.
Yeah.
I think the first thing you have to evaluate if you're going to push back is evaluating the value of that request to basically say, is this worthy or does this meet the value threshold, so to speak, that it's valuable to the business, it's impactful to the department, or is it lacking? Because that's really when the action of actually pushing back is going to occur. It's not just going to be because we're too busy. It's really going to be because that feature or that request in itself it really does not meet the value, but you have to be able to evaluate that.
So for you to be able to say that, to say there's a bar or a line, right? There's a set of standards, right? There's some thoughts around what that means, right? What would be right?
You would hope so, right?
Yeah.
You call them
True.
OKRs, call them whatever, right?
Yeah,
And
that's what I'm
you
thinking.
should have some directive from the organization or even your boss, right? That tells you what is most important. And I forget where I read that, but read or saw. But Tommy, like what your comment elicits is, I think it was like a time management thing, like putting requests through like a priority filter, like everything you do on a workday basis through the priority filter, right? And I think it was the concept was almost everything on a periodic basis, whether it's daily or weekly, goes through this priority filter, and based on the requirements or based on the goals of the company or your team or your manager, or whatever, that's how you filter out what gets 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 in order of the things that you're going to execute on, especially if you're in a realm where there's absolutely no way in a workday you can accomplish what you need to. Everything's got to get shoveled through that priority filter. And then if people start asking questions around why things aren't getting done or why, you know, well, ultimately that, right? Then you always have a clear answer of, well, these are my priorities, and the requests that are coming in aren't winning against other priorities for my team. And I think the business intelligence team is kind of unique from the standpoint that you're usually positioned in a lot of different organizational units, or you're helping, which creates kind of some like friction or potential friction, because somebody else's priority may be higher within the organization, even though it's your top priority.
Yeah, and I think it's one, I love that in terms of trying to rank it. I would love to create a true weighted system for any request that comes in that would basically automate a score for like a value index. A few things that we look at, but and since I haven't actually created the algorithm, but I would consider anything that would say, okay, what meets this value? One is the person requesting should matter. If they're not a manager or director, and they'll say
The
they're
person requesting should matter. Is that what you
well,
said?
no, like I mean, like that should matter in terms of like, okay, if it's
Oh,
listen,
okay.
Oh, I
yeah.
see you're saying.
Everybody matters, Seth. First off, so everybody
Sweet.
matters, but their position at the company should be in a sense of weight. Obviously, if someone with a title that starts with a C, probably going to do it no matter what.
That's
But
true.
right. But if it's an intern,
your level of the organization and the needs that you have, okay, you're able to choose the direction of what we're working on more clearly than everyone else. But this is
an intern.
But this is where I think things get tricky, because if I think about like what we're talking about, like OKRs and aligning key goals, and when those executive level individuals ask for reporting, those need to get done, right? They're asking for the reports because they need information to help them make decisions that are going to affect the broader part of the organization. Totally understand that. But as you deflect some of these requests, right? You think there's this massive funnel of requests coming into the team. If you're deflecting these requests and saying we don't have time for that, that's not a high priority for us, they're gonna go find the solution somewhere else. They're gonna figure out some way of doing this. So I feel like there's this constant need to educate the data culture of the broader part of the organization, so that way when you deflect those requests, they can self-service to some point.
And I think that goes in the other parts that you should consider. It's so obviously that the level of the person who's requesting at the company.
Yeah.
Obviously, if it's an intern, you're probably not going to make that your first thing you do in the morning. And then I think the other part too, to your point, is kind of from the technical side is this a build from the ground up? Are we starting from the ground up, or is this something we could build on top of? Do we already have a data set where we just have to add
Yes, I do
create
like
a few
that.
more measures,
Yes.
or is it like a a sales? It's a targeted report for one team, so all we have
Yeah.
to do is do a filter. So in the sense that it's much easier, where we don't have to worry about the Q&A, the data sources, the validation. Then to your point, Mike, then it goes into the impact. Like,
Yeah.
so
Yep.
can you relate that back to, even if it is the intern or junior, someone a junior, but if that impact is for the entire marketing team to actually, aligned with one of the OKRs or aligned with the company objectives, or one of the department's main goals,
Mm-hmm.
there's a high impact there. So, or is it just something that person wants because they need to see, how many books were sold, right?
So I guess one of the a question back to you, Tommy, is some of the things that you're bringing up are kind of a priority matrix, right?
Mhm.
Like you could use that in a step back of getting a clear
Right.
review of all of the requests that you have. How do they fit in terms of priority and impact, and how fast you can execute, right? But
Yeah.
isn't that just shouldn't that just be part of your planning?
Ideally, it should be. What I think would happen, you're not necessarily putting into a ranking what you're going to do. I think this is also part of, maybe you direct them to a report, you just show them the filter, but we're not going to build that multi drill through with the last 30 days over the previous period, complex measures that they want, like something that's not really aligned with the business. This is might be something that we're just going to say we're not working on, or we're not going to build this entire application for you, when there's not that value really for the company.
So
Obviously, with
so
everything you're, yeah.
I'm trying to understand like where some of your use case, right?
Mhm.
Is it because you don't have a process, or that clearly defines level of effort, expectations, what order the work is going to get done in, etc., and it's just like a flood? Or is it you've got this defined process and there's a whole lot of other work that somebody's asking you to do on top of that?
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest thing. The influx of requests and projects being worked on, things can get easily pushed to the side. So it calls for this, but I think too, I want to
So
say, yeah.
so the thing I'd like to interject here, right, is to me that there's a part of this conversation that you're having that is not pushback in my mind,
Mhm.
and maybe the pushback is we're not doing this anymore. You all have to follow a process, right?
Mhm.
We as an organization cannot function unless you follow the process by which we prioritize the reports that you want in the order that you want them, because we have finite resources, we have finite time, and you need to clearly define what your expectations are, and we need to have an agreement that based on this process and our execution, you get this deliverable.
Mhm.
If you don't have that process, then the pushback is define and everybody follow this process. Otherwise, you're never going to get out of wherever you're at,
Right.
which is like a million different people are asking you different things and with different expectations, and there's no priority, there's no deliverable, there's no nothing. This is why you have systems like Jira, right? Like that allow you to find a work item with acceptance criteria. You throw in an estimate, you throw in a priority, and then the team goes and executes against that.
Well, let me ask you this: just because someone requests a new report, does that mean we should build it
It
if
goes
you
through
have
an
the time?
evaluation process. Everything should go through an evaluation process.
Yeah. Does it align with your corporate objectives? Is this something that's like a one-off, or like? But again, here, like, there's, if we're talking like central BI team, like if your central BI team owns everything, like if no one else can make their
Mhm.
own data models throughout the organization, or if no one else can, like, I think you're going to get inundated with a lot of additional requests for people just saying, not my job, you got to do it. here's my request, and just whatever off the cuff. There's no thought. There's no plan. There's
Right.
no like, how does this request that I'm asking for fit into the broader organization of reporting? And so I feel like, as we move our way around like this topic, I feel like there's a level of, we're talking a lot about data culture. Like, what culture are we grooming here, and are we allowing people to continually self-educate or be able to? I mean, the whole purpose of Power BI was self-service BI. It's not to the reason Power BI was made wasn't to be like, oh my gosh, we need yet another corporate managed tool for everything. That's not their design.
Right.
So I feel like there's a strong story of, it's the same thing of Excel, right? Everyone goes to Excel for their default data analyst stuff because it's comfortable, they know how to work it, and people find value from it. I think it's the same way here for Power BI stuff. But now we're adding this lens of complexity around data sets, data marts, modeling, like this whole other area here that we're now starting to expose to more of the organization. Well, how do you do that? How do you start shifting the organization mentality to start leveraging these other assets?
I mean, but at the same time, like the bringing an organization to that level is it a lofty goal, right? To have people understand the back end technical
Right.
aspects of where data comes from. Like whether that gets out there, I don't know. But I think in general, though, the things that you're talking about, Tommy, are the first parts of like you have to have a process that is agreed upon within the organization of how things get done.
Right. No, and that's what I'm saying. You can't push back on something that if you don't know if it's valuable or not.
Yes.
Well, you become the problem.
You assess the value. You become the value
problem-
assessor.
Right, but the problem with not having shared priorities or goals or a process within an organization is you will absolutely get hung out to dry
Mhm.
when people are like, well, Tommy's not executing.
Yeah,
Well,
Tommy didn't
Tommy's not
deliver.
executing because you have 100 report requests from all over the organization and you're solely like prioritizing them
Yes.
based on your understanding of the organization, and the organization doesn't have any visibility into that. Right. So how do you create a priority matrix when you don't understand your level of effort, you don't understand the deliverable, but all you understand from the requester is everybody wants it tomorrow.
Oh, totally.
That's very
It's
well.
Power BI is so
untenable.
easy. You can
No,
just
yeah.
you can just produce the report, make it happen, make it go.
So
Forget dinner.
I think the pushback here first, Tommy, in that scenario is you as the stakeholder of creating these reports need to lean into a process that is agreed upon by everybody
Mhm.
so that you have it clarity as far as how and what you can deliver and when you can deliver it by. If the business chooses to shift priority, they can absolutely do that,
Mhm.
right? But it takes a lot to get to the point where you are reviewing a request, doing your due diligence, adding an estimate, understanding how that fits into your ecosystem,
Yep.
right? Because there's an execution part of this on the back end that you're responsible for. Can you look for streamlined ways in which you can execute against all these things in a better way? Can you get them out faster if you did this grouping of, requests? Can
Right.
you get these, do you solve more problems and not have these 10 requests if you put this data set out there? That type of stuff. But that's the handoff back and forth between you and the requester, you and the business, is having that process in place so everybody's on the same page. Otherwise, everybody has unrealistic expectations of you.
Well, and the other part too is the expectations on. I think in the old days, if you were the report analyst, you just really built everything. And if that's the expectation, like where you wait, you're not going to do my request. Like no one's expecting to hear that. They may hear it's going to be delayed, but not we're not going to do this at all, or we're not going to build a report for you. That's the hard part. It's not just prioritizing, but it's also then communicating back to that requester that no, I'm not going to make my team spend 40 hours on something that you're going to be looking at until next week or until next month. And we're just not going to
Sure.
spend that time.
But that definition, right? Like what you're defining, like when you push into a process and everybody knows and understands it, then you don't have requesters coming in and saying, Tommy, I need you to spend 40 hours because I need this week so that next week I can analyze that data one time. Because you're going to be like, well, I'm sorry, you 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 didn't follow the process. There's no way we can turn that around. I mean, more than happy to do that if you get C-level signature, right? If
Mhm.
that's the top priority and we need to fire drill this thing out because it's the most important thing in the world and it's going to take precedence over all of these other objectives, absolutely.
I
More than
Right.
willing to help out.
Yep.
But you're resting that on an agreed upon process within the organization of how you execute as a team.
I like the idea of, so one of the things I think that's very clear here in your mindset that I'm not hearing from you, Tommy, at this point is there's a clear list of the backlog and existing work that is on the plate that is being communicated to key decision makers for when things come into these requests. So, you know, I think of this. So how, let me phrase what I'm thinking here, right? There's these requests that are coming in. Some of these requests are like, it's urgent. We need to get this done. This has to happen right away. And when we're pushing back, part of the pushback is, here's the list of things I'm working on. Here's what we're driving toward. This is what my team is doing. Where does this new priority fit inside that list? And you can document it, but I think there's also a level here too where you're talking, the managers or the leader of, the executive sponsor for the BI team, right? He's got to be able to set some directions there, and someone's going to take the heat for saying no at some
Right.
level, right? But it has to be there, right? Here's the list of priorities, and Seth, to your point, right? Here's what we're working on. Here's the big objectives. Our executive sponsor said to get this stuff done. This is what we're fitting in. Hey, we can do, this little bit of work here, or we have this much room or capacity, or we don't. We're tapped out. This is what we're working on. Someone has to kick out what this is. So again, this is the competing priorities. Yeah. Rafa says the backlog becomes like equals the black hole, but like you have to have that, right? Does this thing come in, above a priority? Sure, it does. But then you only have so much time, you only have so many resources, and something's going to
You,
fall off the list.
so this is where having structure around the execution of your team is important because
Yeah,
how else do you commit, right? If you're
correct.
saying yes to people and committing to deliverables,
You're just going to work a long week.
whether that's an individual if that's an individual contributor, you know how much time, like you're putting your staff at risk because you're not estimating, you're not allowing them time to tell you how long it's going to take. You can't then roll that up and say we can deliver these things in this sprint, right? Or this week's worth of
Right.
work, or this 2 weeks worth of work, right? And that puts you at a disadvantage in this conversation of pushback because in order to push back, I am not a big, I don't like no, right? I think it's a really poor business practice to just like let emotions rise when somebody's asking you to be like asking
Help
something
me out.
unreasonable, whether or not they know it or not,
Yeah,
for you to just be like, no, we can't do that, right?
totally agree.
Not a big fan. What I am a huge fan of is solving, like trying to solve the bottom, the problem collectively. If you're asking me something unreasonable and I know it's crazy unreasonable, and my first response is that's ridiculous, I'm gonna say, listen, let me think about it. Let me figure out how it works. If it fits into the workload or what we could do, and I'll evaluate and I'll get back to you, right? Because then I can go back and I can look at all of the things I planned, right? I have a bunch of deliverables already,
Yep.
right? We have a bunch of priorities that we have to deliver. If we introduce this request, right? Who are the decision makers that have to weigh in and let me know how to reprioritize?
Right.
Because I just can't fabricate time, right? Like the majority of the time, you as an individual contributor are saying, "Listen, I'd love to do this for you, but like, help me prioritize my time, manager. Help me figure out how you want me to execute against this because
Correct.
these two things can't happen at the same time." And very rarely, it is your choice also to say, "Okay, that would take me 5 extra hours. I realize the vast importance of this one-time activity. I'll do it on a Saturday." Right? But that's impeding on your time, and I'm never an advocate for that unless, it's like business imperative kind of thing, and you're willing to do that
Back
because
charge
those are
them.
opportunities for somebody. Those are opportunities for somebody to show value, show commitment to a team or a business, whatever. but a business shouldn't be relying or expecting that from its employees, right? So I think there's a way and a pro and a con, but ultimately, like if you understand your area and you have clarity on these priorities, you're not ever saying no to somebody. You're saying, well, I'd love to do that. Like, how can we work together to figure out what the best solution is here? Because based on my understanding of the company goals, the priorities, etc., yours doesn't fit into that. So who do we need to talk to, right? Should we move into this? Is there a stopgap solution that would help you out, that would still give you the information you need? But no, we're not going to be able to produce this report because it's going to take 80 hours and it doesn't fit into the overall goals of the company.
But I don't think it's your job to push back on all these things. I think it comes back to some level of like when there's a large enough request, like you said there, Seth. There's a report that comes in that's 80 hours. You don't have time to get it done. You take that back up and say, "Hey, business, here's what you asked me to do. What do you want to throw off the plate? Like this is going to take this much time. This is our estimate on what has to be done here. We're bringing new data sources in. This is something we've never done. Like whatever that is, right? Here's our estimate of what this is going to cost or have
Right.
time to do.
Because it's
Two solutions: more people, or reprioritize your work, and then let someone else play the politics game.
It's imperative to, like, we're data folks. This is our jam, man.
Yes, it is.
Bring data to those conversations.
Yeah.
Hey, so and so, I'd love to help you out. Okay. Our current roadmap is 5 weeks out, right? Our deliverables are all planned 5 weeks out.
Yep.
So I have X number of resources, we have X number of time and execution on these things. There is what we can do in the time allotted. Help me find a solution that puts like it's either reprioritization, it's more bodies,
Yep.
or you deprioritize.
Correct. So
right?
it's only two options at this point.
This isn't a, well, Tommy, you're not going to deliver for me. We have finite resources. We have goals of the company, and these are bring this into an objective realm. If a company can't recognize or is not willing to work with you to define success, like, I'm sorry, like this is a two-way street, right? We're trying, you as an individual contributor, a boss of people, somebody who's trying to execute. If you don't have a two-way street of pushback, of saying, hey, more than willing to have this conversation, here's the difficulties, let me outline for you what's top of mind for me on how we execute and deliver for you. Here's the things, we're kind of in a bind, right? We're maxed out, right? And if we're maxed out, there's only a couple paths forward here, and these are the paths forward. Like, what would be your suggestion? How do we get around these things? Do we cut the corner on here? I see some opportunity where maybe we don't build the full solution over here and we just provide the data. I could carve some time there. Like, you're working with the business to try to find a solution without saying no, and without the business being able to just be like, yeah, we expect you to work 120 hours a week, because that's not reasonable.
Yeah, and then you got to push back just for your own personal sanity. But you can't
have that conversation unless you have a baseline. And the baseline is a process of agreement of how things get done, because otherwise there's no visibility into them to say, like, my goodness, like, why is our request taking 40 hours? Well, because you're asking for all of this stuff, right? Why is it taking 80 hours? Because from a technical perspective, it's really hard to implement what you're asking for because we don't have the data sets to do that, or we have to fabricate this stuff. There's a reason for all of our estimates. It's not like, Tommy, you're going into the business and being like, yeah, but you're cutting into my Netflix, like during 12 to 4 is Netflix time, man. Right? Like,
well, yeah, but okay, we're still saying, hey, every request that comes in, except for everything, we'll do alternatives, but I want to ask you, Seth, about request projects that come in that really do not constitute, 5-10 hours of our time. Yeah, we can say we'll do some alternative, but truly, if that's a request that is someone else's shortcut, or in a sense on an island that does not align with the department's goal, you realize that. How does that initiation then start? And I think one thing I really like, but also is pretty tough, is the visibility into the workload. Like, that's number one. Then two, that the BI team has that structure with leadership on what we're going to be working on, rather than just try to complete your tickets. Trying to,
So
and if I'm hearing you correctly,
bare minimum.
yeah,
Like you can spend a lot of time refining this process, right? But one of like clear expectations, even in the chat, we're seeing some of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you want us to start work, if you want us to estimate a report for you, here are the absolute requirements that we need you to add to this thing, this request. If you don't have these requirements, we will not estimate it and your work will not get done, right? Like there's a bunch of, oh, well, we ask these questions and nobody provides feedback. Well, then it's not important, right? Then the requester
right,
doesn't feel it's important enough to provide the information that you need to go build the thing. And that is 100. You need these stepping stones to rely on as a team so you can execute efficiently, right? And if you're not getting that from whoever's requesting the report, even though it's very clear to everybody in the organization that this is how things start, or they don't want to have that conversation with you, then it's not in your backlog yet. It's got to get groomed,
Yep.
right? Or in a
yeah,
state where we need to have a conversation. So then it's a bucket of work that just piles up because somebody goes, well, this is too hard to make a request.
I mean,
Then it's not your problem.
going back to our earlier part of the conversation, Matthew Roach, a lot of times talks about being the path of maximum resistance, right? If you always make yourself the path of least resistance, the requests just keep coming to you more, right? I think people. This is what I've said. People kind of are lazy. They go to the lowest common denominator. I'm lazy, so
right,
I call myself the lazy engineer, right? If I can spend an hour and a half building something I can automate, and then every time I do it, it's automated moving forward, I would rather have the automation completed, so it's just it just works moving forward. I would spend more time up front. So, to that end, if you always say yes to these requests or always let the requests come without some sort of formal review and pushback process, I think you're gonna wind up with challenges there.
But then you also, like, even in this generic process, right? Then you can define those conversations, Tommy, right? On a bi-weekly,
right,
monthly, quarterly basis. You can bring forward like, hey, like we have some dysfunction here. Like a full 20% of our requests have been sitting in this queue for a month and nobody's actually provided us the information we need to go execute or put this into a backlog of how we execute against these things,
Yeah, I like that too.
right? Do we delete them? Do we get rid of them? Like I think as owners, when you're pushing back, the strongest position you can be in, whether it's an individual contributor where you're managing your time, clearly you understand, you've estimated, you've figured out how much you can accomplish in a week, or a manager where you've got a pipeline and you're executing and you have deliverables because you're estimating and working through these things with teams and business units, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
You have to do those things because when you push back, it should always be from a data perspective or a state of here's my understanding of the
right,
business and how I help us as an organization. I'm always more than willing to do that, right? But there are costs and benefits to both those things. If the business doesn't want to invest in cost and more resources to execute faster, then then they're accepting the fact that you can get X amount of work done within a certain time frame. But you have to level set what that is within the organization. So
Agreed.
you're building the blocks of clarity, understanding what you can deliver. You're defining all of the key points and not being the blocker. You're
Yeah.
not a person who's just saying no. You're saying I'm saying yes. Let's figure it out. But here's the blockers for us
Mm-hmm.
collectively, not me, right?
right,
I'm not saying no. I'm saying here's the body of work. It'd be the same as and then you take this to the next realm where ultimately, and I could go on for another 45 minutes on this topic, right? But ultimately, you take it to the next level where you're like, are you going to find a manager or an organization where they're completely unreasonable and they just expect that from you?
Yes, you
Yes,
will.
you'll find that.
Yep.
And how do you get around that? You don't work there, right?
Well,
Like I
you you
ultimately,
you bring
can
the
you work
you
in an
bring the data,
environment?
you bring the data, and if they still don't
Can you work
agree,
in an
then you move on.
environment where even if you're bringing reason and like clarity and willingness to work, that goes both ways. It absolutely goes both ways. And if you are in a place where people don't respect that or respect the information that you're bringing, then that's your choice. But you don't expect that everybody's going to want to have that conversation, because they don't, unfortunately.
I think you hit the nail. You said a lot of great points today, but I do think the most essential part is having the buy-in, right? So you could develop this standard and this process based on the company values and document this all. But the minute you go, the minute you push back and you don't have the buy-in because someone's upset, right? And they go to your boss, or they go to your department head, and they're like, they don't buy into what you've developed, or they're not in agreement with you.
But this is what the
It's all for
executive.
naught.
No, it's not. This is what the executive leadership buys into, though. Like when they hire you and they bring you on the BI team, if your boss should have your back, and if you're getting these other, like, you're going to have people who are going to play the political game, regardless. They're gonna come at you and your boss potentially and say, well, Tommy's team or Mike's team isn't doing what they should be doing. We asked them to do this, and we're not getting what we want. We need this now, because they're looking in the lens of everything they're requesting is 100% most valuable, most important. Only focus on my stuff. And just like in consulting, you can't tell any other customer, I have another customer. Everyone thinks
Right.
they're the only customer, and that's not true. Everyone knows it, but no one talks about it. So to have rules in place, to have at least the conversation in there that says, okay, you have to be able to prepare your manager for these things, because these people will pay. Something we didn't talk about here was the political piece of how organizations works. Some companies are way more. Some people are way more political. Some companies are not. So
Right.
and sometimes you're playing a little bit of CYA on how you're handling and shaping data here, because you're trying to cover yourself to some degree. Here's the request that came in. Look, this is where the data I think helps support you.
Right.
This request came in. Here's the backlog. I'm fine helping them out. And I like your point there, Seth. We don't say no. We just say yes, and here's what we would need to change to make this thing happen. So we're trying to enable. We're trying to come up with good ideas here. But hey, you need to reprioritize my stuff. So, all right, throw these. What of my plate can I not do? Help me prioritize this new request that came in, because they're screaming so loud. And someone's going to stomp their feet loud enough that will cause you to deprioritize some work and focus on their stuff. That it will happen. I've seen it happen a number of times. And you let the higher ups duke it out, right? They set the priorities, and then they're left with the consequences that come through. So, your boss, well, we can't do this new data mart build because we're having to fix something over here that was legacy or whatever that is, or something crashed over here and we have to fix it now. That's going to take priority over the new net development. Okay, but at least it's being very clearly documented, and we know at a high level here's where the compromises are coming in, because no one has enough time or money to get everything done. It just doesn't. At least that's how I feel about it. This
let's talk more.
Right.
Well, Dan recommends a future topic for the podcast should be not only about pushback, but talking about what does a good data project ingestion process look like? How do you ingest projects into a process that you would churn through good results? And something we didn't talk about here at all is the optimization side on the other side of this thing. Just because you have a bunch of reports and everything's coming out, at some point you're going to have a whole. Even if you start turning things on to self-service and having people enable them to do that for themselves, there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff costing you a bunch of money. And how do you identify what's the most expensive things, and how can you optimize what you have in your environment with self-service? I think that's another good topic as well. Well, with that, let's just do quick wrap-ups here, right? We're wrapping up. Let's do our final thoughts. So I guess my final thought for this one is, I think I liked a lot of what you're saying, Seth, around the document the process. Engage your executive sponsors, right? I think you need to have them. You need to clearly communicate the backlog and when new requests come in, have a method to prioritize them against the backlog. So that's what I would say. Tommy, anything for you that was kind of stuck out to you in this one?
I think the biggest things is the structure within the company. You need to have that visibility into the workload in some sort of help desk to make sure.
Yep.
Something that I always preach is any request that comes in, make sure you have a centralized source. So it's not Slack, Teams, email,
Yep.
And the help desk, that everything's centralized.
You can request it from Slack or Teams or whatever, but
Yeah.
I'm going to send you a link that says, fill out this form, put the request here. Yeah, I agree with that. I like that a lot.
And then I think too, the other part of that is just as important is a lot of the help desks do have some, API or data source to create a report on the workload to say, hey, here is how many requests that we have are coming in. Here are how many in progress. So your leadership, your team can actually see that visibility on, we're very busy. Here are the things we're working on in an easy to show way, but also to communicate that with the company. Like, look how busy, look how many things the BI team's working on. And then two is documenting that somewhere, that process to assess all of the success points, but creating something structured that's documented and that is followed.
Awesome. So anything for you?
Yeah. No, for me, the number one path to success in these conversations is first allow yourself time to process the request, right? That of what people are asking. Think of solutions and set a plan. Like ultimately, you want to remove the emotion because a lot of this is frustrating. It can cause a lot of angst within organizations and teams. So you want to deal with it practically.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of never saying no, but that doesn't mean I'm saying yes. And working towards a solution with solid reasons that are data based is the way you are successful at these conversations, I think.
So you're saying there's a chance I can get my report?
You're saying there's a chance. Like, I'm saying you'll get it. When?
Debatable. Awesome. Right. Well, thank you very much. We all appreciate you listening to the podcast. The great topics today, good conversation, wonderful time in the chat. Really great thoughts there. Thank you so much for participating in the YouTube chat. We really appreciate you. If you liked this conversation and felt this was valuable, gave you some things to think about, you're going to reprioritize your whole BI team and add a whole bunch of process to your stuff now because of this conversation. Great. Share it with somebody else. Share this conversation with your boss. Be like, hey, boss, I need to talk to you. So our only
These
ask...
guys are idiots. They don't know what they're talking about.
Our only ask, if you listen to the podcast, is please share it or let someone else know that you enjoyed the podcast and share it with somebody else. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
So if you're listening and enjoying, make sure to subscribe on Apple and Spotify to all of our previous podcasts. If you're listening right now, we do it live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central.
If you want more bad advice, we have 114 other episodes you can go listen to. Excellent. Take care, everyone. Thank you all very much, and we'll see you on Thursday.